Hi, I'm Steve, and welcome to Sights Less Seen, where I visit those maybe not so well-known places you may not find in the normal tourist guide. Today, I'm in Paducah, Kentucky, visiting the National Quilt Museum. Now, this museum was established in 1991 to honor today's quilters, and you'll find both machine-quilted and hand-quilted items in here. Now, I'm not a quilting person, but this museum is just utterly fantastic. There are no photos, there are no paintings. Everything you're going to see is a quilt. We're going to go visit a couple other places also, but I really wanted to show this first because this is the main reason for coming to Paducah. The National Quilt Museum exhibits fiber art and quilting from around the world. The museum is recognized by USA Today as one of the world's top quilt displays. The museum was established by Bill and Meredith Schroeder of Paducah and opened in 1991. It is the only museum dedicated to contemporary quilts and quilt makers. The main gallery is devoted to a rotating selection from the museum's collection of over 650 quilts, with 50 to 60 on display at any one time. Its two other galleries exhibit rotating fiber arts exhibits throughout the year. The museum also features a traveling exhibit that is made up of quilts and fiber art. The quilts in the museum's collection date back to 1980, highlighting 47 states, a dozen countries, and 10 of what are considered the best American quilts of the 20th century. In addition, the museum also offers educational opportunities for adults and kids at all skill levels. In 1993, the museum hosted the first African American Quilters Forum, and in 1995, the museum developed gatherings, an exhibit and conference celebrating quilt documentation projects completed across the country. The museum was honored in May of 2008 when the U.S. Congress designated it the National Quilt Museum of the United States. The museum averages around 40,000 visitors a year. Additionally, Paducah is one of only a handful of UNESCO creative cities in the United States. You will see selections from the museum's extraordinary collection of contemporary quilts, as well as changing exhibitions that celebrate the work of today's finest quilters from America and around the globe. Enter these doors and you will discover a vast array of art, and I do mean art, of quilts and quilt making. You'll be astonished at the artistry of the museum's collection of contemporary quilts and exhibitions that celebrate both traditional and non-traditional quilt making methods. The museum's vibrant and breathtaking exhibits are rotated 8 to 10 times per year. So keep this in mind when you visit, as what you see in this video may not be on display when you're there. What I find so interesting is the variety and complexity of the quilts. Honestly, to me a quilt is just something you sew together from leftover cloth. But these people have vision, imagination, and skills that make my ideas seem so ridiculous. Now, there are what I consider 4 categories of quilt making. There are simple patterns, and I say that comparatively speaking because no quilt is really simple to make. And keep in mind that this is from a person who is not a quilting person, so I'm not an expert on this. Then you go to a more complex quilt, more color, more lines, more detail perhaps, more complexity in the design. The next level just really amazes me. I mean, look at this. This looks like a photograph of someone. Just like this one. This is not a photograph. This is a quilt. And to me, the final level is just absolutely astounding. I mean, these are actual clothes that have been quilted. These people have an imagination that I couldn't even think about, let alone be able to do. As I mentioned earlier, you'll be amazed by these quilts, and I know it's well worth your visit. I was totally surprised by what I saw. After visiting the museum, if you're a professional quilter, or even if you're an amateur, you can stop by Hancock's of Paducah, the largest supplier of quilting material and supplies in the world. Now, I always thought that Hancock's of Paducah was part of Hancock Fabrics, but it's not. The only relationship it has is that the individual who started Hancock's of Paducah, Roland Hancock, is the nephew of the individual who started Hancock Fabrics. After working for his uncle for a couple of years, Roland Hancock in 1969 moved to Paducah with his wife and started their own store. Initially a 15,000 square foot building, it's grown to over 60,000 square feet and has a huge inventory of fabric and every bit of quilting equipment and supplies you could want. They even have customers from many overseas locations. Another place to visit in Paducah is the Tillman House. Now, Lloyd Tillman was a general in the Confederate Army who died at the Battle of Vicksburg. He was born in Maryland in 1818 and entered the United States Military Academy at West Point at, believe it or not, the age of 15 and graduated 5 years later. However, not long after that, he married and resigned his post to become a civil engineer for the American railroad system. When war broke out with Mexico, he rejoined the Army. By the end of the Mexican-American War, he had reached the rank of captain. In 1852, the Tillman family moved to Paducah, where Lloyd worked on railways in Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. When the Civil War erupted, he joined the Confederate Army and in 1861 was commissioned colonel of the 3rd Kentucky Infantry Regiment. He became a brigadier general at Fort Henry on the Tennessee River, about 2 hours south of Paducah, just in time to surrender to Union forces there in February of 1862. Captured after the surrender, he was released in a prisoner exchange in July. He was then assigned to Mississippi. During the spring of 1863, in the Vicksburg campaign, General Tillman was killed by an artillery shell. His body was escorted off the battlefield by his son and aide, Lloyd Tillman, Jr. His home is now a very interesting museum discussing Kentucky's role in the Civil War. Fort Massac sits on the north side of the Ohio River, across from Paducah, on the outskirts of Metropolis, Illinois. And we'll talk about Metropolis here in a few minutes. It was built by the French in 1757 during the French and Indian War. The French left the fort at the conclusion of the war, and it was destroyed by the Chickasaw Indian Nation sometime after 1763. In 1778, during the American Revolutionary War, Colonel George Rogers Clark led his regiment of Long Knives into Illinois near the site of the fort at Massac Creek. The fort was rebuilt in 1794 during the Northwest Indian War. In the fall of 1803, the Lewis and Clark expedition stopped at Fort Massac on its way west, and in 1805, General James Wilkinson and Vice President Aaron Burr held discussions at the fort in what became known as the Burr Conspiracy of 1806 and 1807. The Fort Massac site became the first Illinois state park in 1908. In the 1970s, a partial reconstruction of a 1794 U.S. Army fort was built, but in 2002 it was torn down and a smaller but more detailed version of a fort as it appeared in 1802 was reconstructed. In June of 1938, an alien from outer space arrived on Earth to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. His home is Metropolis, Illinois. His name is Superman. Located on the Ohio River across from Paducah, the city of Metropolis was founded in 1839 near the site of Fort Massac by a merchant from Pittsburgh and a local landowner. The two envisioned that the location on the Ohio River would become a transport hub and chose a befittingly grand name, Metropolis. So for you Superman fans, unfortunately, it was not named for a comic book or a TV show, unlike Truth or Consequences New Mexico. However, DC Comics and the Metropolis Chamber of Commerce designated Metropolis, Illinois as Superman's hometown in 1972, and the Illinois General Assembly passed a resolution of its own to make the same designation. 20 years later, the Super Museum was established. In addition to the downtown museum, since 1978, Metropolis has hosted a 4-day Superman celebration featuring Superman writers and celebrities as guests and fans from across the world flocking to the city. The 2016 celebration, according to the event's official website, attracted guests from 47 states and 6 different countries, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. A lot of people have never heard of Paducah, Kentucky, don't even know it exists, but I'm telling you, there are some nice things to see around here. The National Quilt Museum, as far as I'm concerned, is outstanding. And of course, there's the Tillman House that we talked about. Across the river is Fort Massac, and of course, Metropolis, the home of Superman, and you can see his statue and visit the museum there. A couple of hours from here is an 1850s working farm, which provides an insight into what it was like to live on a farm in Kentucky or anywhere else in the United States, for that matter, 170 years ago. You'll see interpreters in period clothing doing their daily chores on this real working farm. The artifacts, restored historic structures, and traditional seasonal activities provide a first-hand account of farm life before the Civil War. And another couple hours from here is Russellville, Kentucky, home of the original bank, considered one of the first banks that Jesse James ever robbed. This is Steve. I'll see you next time on Sights Less Seen.